You can take all the pills, do all the diets, take the antibiotics, whatever it is for your SIBO protocol, but if you're not figuring out that key, you're probably not going to heal.
Today we're exploring SIBO, or Small Intestinal Bacterial Overgrowth. Did you know that up to 80% of IBS cases might actually be SIBO, quietly wrecking your energy and focus? I'm thrilled to dive into gut health with Jen Yunt Coles, the SIBO coach, who conquered her own decades-long battle with bloating, candida, mold, and a stress-triggered heart scare. Now, she's empowering others to ditch fatigue and brain fog with a personalized, no-nonsense approach. Let's uncover how to take back your gut and your life. Hey, good morning, Jen. Thank you so much for your time today.
Hey, Joe, I am so excited to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, of course. And I'm glad we connected offline. I read about you, obviously, your story. You got hit hard with SIBO, right? Mold, candida, a stress-induced heart event. For people who don't understand what this is, like, was there a time, what did you realize when you were just managing the symptoms, wasn't really doing the job? And how did this sort of turn to you now coaching others on SIBO and helping them?
Yeah. So my big wake-up call, I think, was broken heart syndrome several years ago after just having years and years of a stressful go-getter lifestyle on top of digestive issues that were not really getting resolved. I lived for decades with that generic diagnosis of IBS, which really doesn't tell you anything, and just was really suffering sort of just physically, but also emotionally, like in my relationships. I also found out I had mold in my home. And so it was all just really compounding. And I think once I hit rock bottom in that moment, that was the catalyst for me to understand that, wow, okay, instead of constantly trying to overachieve and being hyper vigilant and trying to help myself, let me try to start integrating some of these things I already know. But it was also the jumping point for me to move into learning about functional medicine and health coaching. And so I'm so grateful, obviously, for that journey. It wasn't fun when I went through it, and even to this day I'm still healing in different ways. I think that was the real catalyst to get me where I am. Once I put myself through functional medicine school because I wasn't getting the help I needed from my doctors. I'm kind of a rabbit hole, geek out, research type of person. So that's kind of what led me to helping myself. And then word got out in my community that I was helping people with SIBO. And so that's how I became the SIBO coach. Yeah.
Well, no, that's obviously it helps to have not in this respect helps, but it's good to have the relationship that you're coaching others on. How did you discover the mold in the house?
Yeah, so interestingly, it's kind of a funny story. I grew up as a military kid. Mm-hmm. So we could never do anything to our home that we were living in that was on the base. So as an adult, I was always just so fascinated with the idea of being able to change things on my own and renovate. So we had 3 houses in a row that I have worked on renovating, and all 3 of them had mold and in different places. So laundry rooms, behind kitchen cabinets, behind refrigerators, in a garage. And so finding those things, obviously now I'm a lot more, well-versed and equipped on how to handle those sort of things. But in the beginning, you're not wearing a mask, you're not doing any of these things to kind of protect yourself. And so that was the first time I was exposed to mold. I didn't realize that it was underneath a toilet that was leaking. And for several years lived in that house, and it showed up on a mycotoxin test. And so that's what, sort of prompted me to look in my house to kind of find where it was. And so, yeah, but now I'm a lot more mindful of that sort of thing. I'm paranoid, actually.
Are there tips that you recommend for people looking into that?
Yeah, so obviously if you are going to be doing any renovation on your house, first of all, you'd want to be protecting yourself and having air filters and all of that, wearing appropriate masks and cleaning yourself afterwards. But yes, there are tests that you can get. There's like the ERMI test. They can come out and they do sort of a comprehensive putting dishes everywhere, all of your house, to try to capture mold spores and things like that. But as far as your body goes, you can certainly get testing called mycotoxin testing. And the one that I prefer is usually usually won by Vibrant Wellness, and they have a really good system where they're finding like the mold metabolites in your urine. So it works a little bit differently, but it's really great information. And notably, even though mold isn't my expertise, you could have two people living in the same environment being exposed to mold on a daily basis, and one person's methylation and detoxification pathways are optimal and the other person's isn't, and so that one with those weaker or impaired genetic SNPs, for instance, will be more susceptible to having a toxic load.
Yeah, it's true. You do hear that pop up a lot, and again, this person's living with it, the other person doesn't know.
Yeah.
When it comes to SIBO, it seems that a lot of it's just mistaken for stress and busy professionals, busy women. Obviously, your symptoms showed up. Are there other ways maybe it's hiding in plain sight for people dealing with hormones and packed schedules, busy women, go-getters?
Yeah. So let me start by just saying, and for those in your audience that aren't aware, so SIBO stands for Small Intestinal Bacterial Overgrowth. And this it was a catch-all diagnosis, I think, for a while, but it is shifting now that there's more research coming out. But essentially what it means is that there is bacteria in your small intestine that shouldn't be there. So typically you have a diverse variety of microbes living in your larger colon where the fermentation is, occurring. But when it is located in the small intestine, although it's not typically a sterile environment, I wouldn't say, but you don't want boys on the playground in there and any kind of pathogens overgrowing, because that's causing leaky gut and inflammation, and then essentially eating your food before you get to. And so that can cause, different conditions from, having some level of, nutrient deficiency or insufficiency, right? So it can turn up and look like not just digestive issues, but I've had folks come to me who don't have a single digestive symptom, but they have chronic migraine or things like rashes and eczema and psoriasis and things like that. I've had a client come to me who had a chronic twitching eye and was just driving them nuts. And we found out that it was rooted in their gut and that, their minerals were insufficient at that point. So, lots of investigating. I think too, it shows up as fatigue or low mood, decreased libido, impaired sleep, all these things that as sort of active women, we kind of make excuses for. Oh, I'm a mom, I'm working, it's no wonder I'm tired. Of course, all of those things can be at play, but through the lens that I'm looking at, looking through, I see the gut microbiome is key to all of those kinds of symptoms. Yeah.
It totally does. I was going to ask, are you testing in the same manner? Is it like a gut microbiome test, or is it urine-based?
Yeah, so for SIBO in particular, there's what we call a breath test. So of course you can go and get an aspirate done and, in a doctor's office or anything like that, but that's quite invasive, and usually they just use that for studies and research. So the most typical and common way is to order a SIBO breath test, and there's a number of different ways you can go about doing that. I don't know if you want me to get into the details of it, but there's different types, and they will give you different levels of information. The one I prefer is the 3-hour lactulose breath test, and we can talk about why I prefer that if you want. But what it's essentially doing is that bacteria in your small intestine are fermenting your food, like it's at a buffet and having fun, and then it's producing gases, and so that gas is traveling up and then is exhaled through your lungs, and it's captured in this test. And so that gives you information of like how much gas production there is, and it can give you clues about which bacteria is overgrown. I also use stool testing in my practice because that can be a clue. Obviously, it's a count from your large colon, but it's a clue to what may be overgrowing in the small intestine, if there's methanogens, if there's hydrogen sulfide and things like that. So those are kind of those are the main two things that I use in my practice to sort of come up with what I'm going to quote unquote say diagnose. I'm a health coach, so technically I don't diagnose, but and more than that even, so those are data points, right? One piece of the puzzle. But I'm looking at the person sitting in front of me. What are their symptoms? What's their environment? And what's going on with their digestion, so that I can get a better idea of how it matches up with the test results.
And when you said hydrogen sulfide, can you explain what that means? I've read a little bit about it. I've read like sulfur smells, and
yeah,
it's kind of hard to sort of tackle. And it might sort of zap your energy. Tell me if I'm incorrect, but what exactly does that mean when you're diving into that?
Yeah, so I'll preface that with, so right now there's three categories of what we're still calling SIBO, but they're getting different names right now by, the powers that be. And so we have SIBO, which is typically hydrogen gas producers. And that's, located in the small intestine. That's why it's still in the same category of SIBO. And then there's methanogens, which are actually an archaea, not technically a bacteria. It can be found in either the large intestine or the small intestine, and they've been recategorized as what we call intestinal methanogen overgrowth. So that's IMO. And you have to be constipated in order to have that positive diagnosis. So that's kind of a lot of information, right? But under the umbrella of what I do, I call it SIBO, all of it. And then the third one that's less understood or less studied rather. More research is coming out now, but this is my specialty within the realm of SIBO. So it's hydrogen sulfide. And we know that, hydrogen sulfide is occurring naturally in the environment. And if we're exposed to it, we're immediately put into like a hyperbaric chamber because it can be quite neurotoxic to our body. We do produce small amounts of hydrogen sulfide in the body, like when we're eating sulfury type foods or like cruciferous vegetables or onions and garlic and things like that. That's normal to have a little bit of reaction to that as far as, maybe a little bit of gas. But when it becomes overgrown and you have an increase in sulfur reducing bacteria, you can have these increased symptoms that are a little bit outside of the regular SIBO symptoms. So it could look like rashes, brain fog, panic attacks, anxiety, heart palpitations. For women, common is bladder pain and vulvodynia. And so it looks a little bit different than the more common SIBO types. It can cause diarrhea or constipation depending on where it's located in the intestinal tract. And really, people report feeling toxic. They feel like their nervous system is dysregulated. They're not sleeping well. They can't think straight. And yeah, I hear that a lot. And that's how I felt when I had hydrogen sulfide. So that's really where I ended up kind of focusing my superpowers of research and everything, because I wanted to become the person that I wish I had been able to find at the time. To help people overcome this, because it can be so debilitating. And people will blow up like they're 9 months pregnant with really, really intense gas and distension. It's quite painful.
Wow, that sounds not pleasant.
No.
Is there like a certain, and I know you deal a lot with, high performing, women. Is there a certain age group or demographic that this hits harder than others, or is it regionally?
Yeah, so that's actually a really good question, and I don't know 100% the answer to that, but I might be able to say something like, well, in my practice, I'm mostly seeing women, but I do see men. Mostly women between the ages of 30 and 70. Interestingly, the women who are going through peri and menopause are the ones who are a little more susceptible to this, because there is a dynamic, many of these pathways are moving through the liver at the same time. So if your liver is struggling to detox these dead bacteria body parts and this, all these toxins that are being released from these bacteria, trying to process your fluctuating levels of estrogen, hydrogen sulfide especially is, interconnected with histamine levels in the body. So histamine is moving through that liver pathway as well. And so for women between the ages of like 35 and 55, I would say it's more common. Because of that extra estrogen, issue. So that's a really good question.
No, that I was just curious because I know, I believe you call yourself a recovering perfectionist. Is there maybe past trauma that could flare this up? Like sort of the gut-brain axis, the link, whatever, buzzwords people use. What's the relation, if any,
Yeah, so this is something that is near and dear to my heart as a recovering perfectionist. So perfectionism is sort of a form of hypervigilance, right? And so it kind of keeps us stuck in the sympathetic dominance of, sort of overachieving and being hyper-focused on, like a protocol or a diet. Even past trauma, we store all of these things in our body parts. And I found through my studies of traditional Chinese medicine, that we have these energetic meridians that are related to our organs and their function. And interestingly, in traditional Chinese medicine, the heart is connected to the small intestine. So when we're, maybe feeling some sort of heart-related emotional trauma or stories that we're holding on to or things that we haven't clearly processed, from an experience earlier in life, that could certainly affect our small intestine if you're looking at it through that lens. And the same with the large colon is connected to the lungs, which carries what we call grief and sadness and things like that. So energetically, there's definitely a connection. I think too, interestingly, you were talking about that mind-gut connection. When we are doing what I like to call protocol perfectionism, we're so hyper focused on, I have to do this exact diet, I have to take this supplement at the exact right time. And it's just this forward feeding cycle. It's a real tough conversation I need to have with some of my clients about how to release some of that and have faith in their body's ability to heal itself and to let go of some of that constant, what I'm going to call hypervigilance and perfectionism. It's really interesting because, in your practice, you always attract people who are kind of like you. So I see a lot of these types. And so I can speak from experience. Once I decided to let some of that go, be a little more flexible, do some deep belly breathing and, believe in my body's ability to heal itself, things started to shift. But it wasn't until then that things started to shift, right? Because before that, I was just like, I have to find this. I have to find the new supplement. I have to do this diet. And it's just too much. It's too much. Your brain and your gut are constantly in communication. Those microbes are like, ooh, we're freaking out. Okay, the brain's freaking out now. That, it's like continuing.
Right. No, I like how you said that because there are a lot of practitioners out there, coaches, whatever that might be, that are all about timing. Like it has to be this and do this midway through that. And it does start to be so regimented that you're so focused. And again, someone that's a perfectionist, that might backfire in some way, I would imagine.
Yeah. I think it really just depends on who you're working with, because some people will show up and just be like, Jen, tell me what to do. And I say, well, first of all, I'm your coach and your partner, so we're going to have a discussion here and see what resonates with you and come up with a custom plan for you. But I don't use blanket protocols because of this very reason. Everyone is so different, and how they're going to be able to implement something in their daily life is so different. One person may be working, 50 hours a week and they need to have everything simplified. And then another person is like already retired, right? And so they're like, okay, I have a little more flexibility to do it this way. Or I'm traveling a lot, so I need some, something a little more custom to my schedule. And that's what medicine should be, right? It should be individualized and personalized.
How are you looking at calming the nervous system with, I guess, hydrogen sulfide methods that you specialize in? How does that work for someone that doesn't really understand, okay, sympathetic, parasympathetic, and
yeah.
Now we're talking about hydrogen sulfide. Like, how does it all work together to sort of bring back energy and clarity?
Yeah, that's a really important question because, when someone has had some sort of chronic, ongoing, simmering infection in the intestinal tract, they are essentially put into a fight or flight mode. Okay, and so when you're in that place, your body doesn't think that you're safe to heal. And you're just focusing on survival at that point and running from the tiger, which I'm sure you talk a lot about on your show. And the thing that's really important is that when someone first comes to me, two of the first conversations we have before we even talk about the pathogenic overgrowth in their intestinal tract is, let's talk about stress and let's talk about your immune system, because for some reason your immune system's been tolerating this overgrowth, and I have a feeling that stress has something to do with it, right? So what I do to sort of lean into that for people who aren't really making that connection is, one, first of all, let's start with some breath, because we know that archaea and bacteria and hydrogen or sulfur reducing bacteria don't want to be in an oxygenated environment. So getting some really deep belly breaths in regularly. And you'd be surprised how many times I hear from my clients, oh my gosh, I can't even remember the last time I took a full deep breath, right? So, and especially when we're bloated, we're not necessarily trying to get our air down there. We're kind of like breathers. And so it's really important to talk about that first. One of the other things I love, as far as biohacking goes, is stimulating the vagus nerve. So the vagus nerve, remember, is the superhighway of communication between the brain and the gut. And we used to think it was mostly the brain talking to the gut, but now we know it's really the microbes in our gut that are in charge. We're just like walking around giant bags of microbes. They're in charge of everything. And so it's really important for us to re-regulate that communication and help our bodies start sort of settling into a space of safety so that we can start to heal. You can take all the pills, do all the diets, take the antibiotics, whatever it is for your SIBO protocol, but if you're not figuring out that key, you're probably not going to heal. And that's the truth of it. And that's a hard conversation I have to have with some of my clients. But yeah, doing things like just massaging this area underneath the ear and down to the collarbone. Some of my favorites are singing, humming, gargling, gargling water. The other one is gagging, which a lot of people don't love, but it's also very effective. Hydrotherapy, so, alternating between hot and cold water is a really great way to stimulate that as well. And just like foundationally, having optimal mineral levels on board because, we need that as a cellular foundation for healing and calming the nervous system as well. So yeah, and then like I said, talking about the immune system, what's up with it? Let's support a robust response because for some reason you've been tolerating this for a while. Another thing I like to use too is journaling because in the digestive world, we know that people are holding on to all kinds of things in their gut, emotionally and mentally. So it's really important to kind of get some of those things out on paper or talk them out if you need to. I was going to say one more thing. I think it was joy activators. I like to use these in my practice where I feel like people who are stuck in chronic illness for a long time forget the things that bring them joy because they've been isolated and depressed. And so we talk about how can we up-level this frequency in your body of finding things that you enjoy doing, whether that's like playing fetch with your dog in the middle of the day or getting out your old, crochet needles from 20 years ago or whatever it looks like for you. Singing at the top of your lungs in the car at the red light, just do it, right?
Yeah. Well, and what about when it comes to probiotics, herbs? Is that more of a tailored approach with people? Do you introduce them as needed?
Yeah, so I'm definitely using those in my practice, and it really depends on who's sitting in front of me. So some people will do better with, clearing bacteria first, so using antimicrobials, whether that's antibiotics or herbal antimicrobials. Some people will opt for doing the elemental diet, which is 2 to 3 weeks of just drinking an elemental formula that's just straight up amino acids and it gets quickly absorbed. So you're nourishing yourself but starving the bacteria. Some people do better with like a little teeter-totter approach, what I like to call, it's kind of back and forth where you're doing a little bit of support with probiotics and healing herbs and targeted nutrients and then shifting that into a little bit of antimicrobial and then back and forth. And really depending on who the person is, what their body is doing and what their daily lifestyle is like and really kind of what their expectations are too. So what they're willing to do. And so it's highly individual. Yeah.
So is that like what I read on your site, primary foods focus, sort of tied to what's practical and what's real reality for you and what you're dealing with in your life?
Yeah. So, there are what I'm going to call quote unquote celebrity protocols out there. That are just kind of blanket, one size fits all type of ideas for SIBO, and I don't really subscribe to those. I don't think that they are of the highest service. Of course, maybe they are successful in some ways, but we're so unique and complex. Not one person is living in the same environment, not one person is working the same load in the same day or having the same relationship and conversations every day. Some people don't have the same support system as others, and those are all things that are going to make a difference for someone in addition to which supplement they're taking or which food they're eating. And so, I find that people who have a support system or at least someone in the home that can help them prepare meals and keep track of everything tend to be a lot more successful than those who are living on their own or don't have that support. And that was a roundabout maybe answer to your question, but yeah.
Is it more, whether it's a couple or whatever, a parent that lives, an elderly parent that you're taking care of, whatever it might be, does it help if they're sort of following the same protocol to a degree? Because, you're trying to cook meals, but now you're cooking this for this person and that for yourself. Then I think people get frustrated, like, all right, I just can't do this. Well, does it help to have that sort of team effort?
Yeah, so that's a really good point, and that comes up a lot, especially for women who are in a family kind of dynamic where they feel like all of a sudden now they have to cook two separate things, but I do not say do that. I try to provide recipes and food ideas that can be easily adapted to like whatever else everyone is, eating at dinner, so that you don't feel like you're separate and that it's more work. I'll also introduce things like batch cooking and then, putting the extra in the freezer so it's not building histamine and making things easier. So I like to call it cook once, eat twice, so that you have a little bit better of a system. I'll also coach some of my clients on how to prepare a list in advance and go to the store and buy everything. And, I'm also working on my own cookbook right now because there's so many resources out there, but they don't overlap in the way that a lot of my SIBO clients need. Like, they might need a little bit of low FODMAP, which is the activity that kind of triggers those symptoms for SIBO. Maybe they need a lower histamine diet. Maybe they need lower sulfur intake for a short period of time. And personally, I've been gluten-free and dairy-free for several decades. So I'm putting all of that together into one place, and hopefully that'll be a good resource for those people who are just like, oh my gosh, what do I see so many people come to me who've been living on like 5 foods for a long time, and it's so depressing. Like, let's get you some food variety and nutrients so you can heal yourself. You can't heal yourself on 5 foods, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I mean, you have to have some fun, like you said, singing in the car, whatever it might be. You have to have fun in life.
Yeah,
And eat the same
right.
5, right? Eating the same 5 things every day.
Yeah, and for a lot of people, food is a love language, so it's really important. Yeah.
No, that's a great point, because I think people do get, and back to the regimented thing where they feel, okay, my job is regimented. Okay, it's easy to fall into just eating these 5 things because I do these 5 things at work, and then their whole life is just a schedule, and they're not really letting go.
Yeah, I mean, in my practice, how I go about it, food variety and food freedom is always going to be the ultimate goal. So we may be on a temporary restricted diet for, just a short period of time, just to kind of calm down some of the digestive symptoms. And that's also sort of like, so the client gets, buys in a little bit, like, okay, I'm starting to feel a little bit better. Let's keep moving. But yeah, just living on restricted food diets like the low FODMAP diet is not what I'm going to call a cure at all. It's just kind of a symptom manager. It's not getting to the root cause.
And for someone who's dealing with SIBO, is it for some a lifelong thing, or are you seeing, okay, like the average person might be with me for a year and then they kind of self-manage, or how does that look for someone?
Yeah. So right now, I would say my clientele, it ranges between so I have like a 6-month comprehensive, like they're pretty much coming in at that commitment level, because that's how long it kind of takes to implement some of these things. And, life is happening during 6 months and all that. But I would say typically between 6 and 12 months for the average client. I would say probably about 80% of my clientele are SIBO free when they leave. And there is that smaller percentage of folks who I like to call my management clients, because they have some sort of physiological issue, whether it's scar tissue or like they had a surgery or some sort of anatomical anomaly that they were born with, some sort of reason, and or I will add people who will not give up their stressful lifestyle. Those people need to be put into that sort of SIBO management category. And so, we kind of go through it ebb and flow and keep them on track and reset when appropriate. But that's a smaller percentage for sure.
And another word we keep hearing lately, or a term, I guess, brain fog, which seemingly applies to a lot of different potential outcomes or causes of. When it comes to SIBO, do you have any advice for someone who maybe what they're eating, or like you said, vagus nerve stimulation, that might be able to clear the mental fog, help them feel sharper, just to kind of get back on track?
Yeah, brain fog is a huge one, and especially frustrating for those of us who have a lot of things we want to get done, right? And so, interestingly, I just did a summit interview a couple weeks ago? I'm losing track of time, speaking of brain fog, but it was about sugar and the gut, the gut connection of having a lot of sugar. So that's going to be one thing I might say is that reducing your sugar intake is going to be a really great idea for reducing microbes and that connection to the brain fog and that just overall inflammatory state in the body. Remember, when you are under a lot of stress, whether it's environmental or at work, or you had a tough conversation with someone, or it's physiological because of what's going on in your gut, your brain isn't trying to think about anything else. It's not going to be using its imagination or its creativity or anything like that. It's tunnel vision survival at all costs, right? And so that can feel like brain fog because you're not able to expand your mind. But some of the things I studied acupressure earlier in my career, and so there are a few that I like to recommend. I don't know that everyone's looking at the video while they're listening to this, but there's Hoku, which is right here in this little divot of your hand where your finger and your thumb meet. This is a really great acupressure point for moving energy down, so it can be helpful for indigestion, headaches, brain fog, even like premenstrual cramps. And then there's another one on the inside of your wrist. So you know how you have this little crease, right? If you do 3 of your fingers where your third finger lands, this is I'm forgetting what the Chinese name of it is. I think it's called inner frontier or something like that. This is a really great point for not only calming the heart, like if you're feeling anxious, but can clear the mind of the fog. So it's kind of like lifting the veil, as they say. And so those are 2 that I like to use. But again, going back to some of the vagus nerve kind of activation will help too. Yeah, good question.
No, I was going to say, because I've read, SIBO can flare back up. You mentioned your clients that are more managing over time. How about when it comes to like motivation? You think, oh, I put all this time into it. I changed what I was eating. I was trying to be doing the right thing, and now it came back. How do you sort of keep them motivated?
Yeah, so that's always like, a tricky thing in my coaching practice, because I, at the same time, want to help educate and empower my client in their decisions that they're making. Because sometimes those relapses happen because of whatever lifestyle choice they made that maybe wasn't the best one. So obviously you don't want to shame them, right? You want to meet them where they're at, right? But I like to see sort of those, what I'm going to call a slight setback, or, falling back a little bit, is more of a signal and information, right? So I'm not going to call it a flare, but it's an opportunity for a recalibration. Like, okay, let me reset. Let me check in with myself. Am I living how I'm supposed to be living? Am I doing the things that I know are more supportive? Am I self-sabotaging at this point? Let's have a good, honest conversation. And then, we may need to do a temporary, reset with doing some prokinetics, which is going to help with your migrating motor complex and that sweeping wave in the intestinal tract to help clear bacteria. Or I might say, hey, why don't you consider doing an elemental diet for like a long weekend just to give your digestive symptom or break system. Oh my gosh, I'm tripping over my words. And, there are tools that we have in our toolbox, and I certainly help my clients create their own toolbox as we're working together. Like I'll say, we're going to use this temporarily for right now, but you might want to keep it in your toolbox for later, just in case you do see symptoms come back. Now, here's the thing. A good 70 to 80% of people who are suffering from SIBO, who go the conventional medicine route and take 2 weeks of antibiotics like rifaximin, for instance, those people have a 70 to 80% chance of relapse within even a few weeks or up to 6 months later. So it's quite common. And that's because the conventional medicine approach is really missing the full picture, right? It's not looking at the person and their unique situation. It's not supporting their immune system or their nervous system. It's not following up with a conversation about how to stimulate and regulate the migrating motor complex, which is that muscle contraction in the intestinal tract to keep you regular. All sorts of things, right? It doesn't even address like, how do I get back to thinking about things like mitochondria after I've cleared this bacteria? Because your mitochondria takes a hit after having a chronic simmering gut dysbiosis. And so this is why people will often relapse.
That makes sense, because obviously you personally have overcome a lot, and I was wondering how that sort of connects to your coaching style, because it seems like you've seen everything or as a lot personally, and how that sort of shapes your, I guess, no nonsense sort of coaching style.
Yeah, I do like to use what I call real talk with people. And I'll
There you
say,
go.
okay, Joe, I'm going to give it to you like it is, right?
Right, right.
Part of my mission is to both create a safe space for my client to land in because they've probably felt isolated or misunderstood or dismissed from wherever they've been before they come to see me. The other thing is that at this point in my practice, I see very complex cases with people who have co-infections now. So they've got parasites and candida and mold exposure and even Lyme and all of these things that are making SIBO more complicated, right? So it's peeling away the onion and untangling the spaghetti of that person's health case. And in one sense, I'm there to empower them and help them see that they are going to be their own best advocate. So education is part of that. So I'm going to say, this is what's happening. These are your options. And then we're going to have a conversation about what feels best for your nervous system right now. What do you think is possible? What can you commit to, right? I'm meeting that person where they are. And then there's a conversation about, is there anything else that we need to dive a little deeper into? Obviously, I'm not, a clinical therapist or anything like that, but a lot of stuff comes up in these sessions. Stories from old, stories that they're telling themselves, self-talk. And so there's a lot of work to be done on that in that realm as well, like helping someone figure out how they can best heal themselves, own that power. And then, there's an element of trying to inspire and encourage them as their coach, as their cheerleader. So it can be complicated and complex, but I just love what I do. And I love getting check-ins like, oh my gosh, Jen, I can't believe it. I've pooped every day and it's been awesome. I feel like I'm running through a field of flowers, it's like that makes everything I do worth it.
Yes, I can imagine, right? You want to hear the positive, not just all the help, right?
Yeah.
I believe it was 22% of SIBO rates climbing in some groups. Not sure if that's accurate, but if so, what do you think people listening, you mentioned you're, gluten-free, focusing on gut healing. Why is that so important right now? Why are we seeing this shift upwards?
I will recommend that people go gluten-free for a while, even if they're not celiac, because we know that protein is quite inflammatory for most people. And so the goal is to be healing that intestinal tract. So we want to reduce anything that may be inflaming it. So I'm just going to put that little seed there. But I don't require every single person to be gluten-free, especially long-term, if that's not something that they need. But as far as gut health goes and, sort of my clientele or people that are in your audience, the thing that's important to understand is that SIBO in particular isn't just about having a bloated belly or wanting to feel good in your clothes. Obviously, those are important. But it's impairing your executive function. It's, decreasing your ability to create hormone resilience and affecting your nervous system adaptability. And all of those things are going to lead into whether or not you have drive and focus and vision for your future and your mojo, right? You're like losing your mojo because you're stuck in this place. And so when I'm looking at gut health and your gut integrity, I'm thinking about that's your leadership, that's your creativity, that's your passion and your mission, that's your connection to other people. Because when you're not feeling well, you don't socialize, right? Or have important conversations with your loved ones because you feel isolated or depressed. And so to answer your question in a nutshell, I just kind of feel like it's so important for not only things like longevity and pleasure, but daily performance, right?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think people are, again, the busier they got, again, people, you said families, women who might have young kids or spouses that also work, so they're trying to split the chores. Yeah. And they're kind of taking that for granted. And I know there's no one size fits all, and everything is certainly, personalized, especially in your practice. But say someone they're listening, they're like, okay, I think maybe this is me. Maybe I should start looking into stuff. Is there something there's no magic pill, of course, but something they could do immediately to see if that relieves the bloating or gives them a little more energy? Where would you start there?
Yeah, so that's kind of a loaded question because there are lots of things. But one of the first things I might recommend is dialing up your eating hygiene. And that sounds so boring, but it's at the top of the list. So I want to just kind of set the stage here, right? We're busy, we're on the go, we're eating lunch at our desk, or we're in the car going through the drive-thru. I mean, hopefully we're not, but you know, the reality, right? Many of us are doing that. And not sitting upright with our feet on the floor. We're like, you know, hunkered and curved around watching Netflix, eating our dinner, you know, on the couch or whatever. So it's important to like have proper posture while we're eating, feet on the floor and chewing one bite at a time. You'd be surprised how many people, when they start thinking about this, realize that they're swallowing chunks of food rather than, you know, getting it to the point of feeling like paste or butter in your mouth, which is the key. Remember, digestion is starting already in the mouth, right? So I want to make sure that we're starting off on a good place. Also, just breathing and like taking your time and giving thanks and being in a more positive nervous system kind of situation. Because remember, when we're in that fight or flight or sympathetic again, and we're trying to scarf down our meal in a hurry, or we're worried about the meeting that we have to go to next, our digestion is totally turned off. So you might feel bloated and, you know, have indigestion, nausea after that, and that's why. So the other thing too, I'll say really quickly, is that in America, we have this whole culture of like getting a giant glass of ice water and having that with our meal, and that's completely dousing your stomach fire. And you need that robust stomach fire, your stomach acid, to help that initial stage of, or the second stage of digestion, right? It's starting in your mouth and then down into your stomach. If you don't have that on board, you're passing along larger chunks of food into the small intestine, which then become a buffet or fodder for bacteria to feed on. So that's going to be one thing at the top of the list. Dialing in your mindful eating habits. I'd say again, I mentioned it earlier, is the deep belly breathing. We're all shallow breathers. We're even becoming mouth breathers because we're so stressed out, we don't even realize it. Having a deep breath that goes all the way down to the bottom of that abdominal area and circulating that oxygen, but also stimulating the diaphragm, which is stimulating the vagus nerve and resetting your nervous system so that you can digest. Going on a walk after you eat may also help stoke that digestive fire and that whole system there. Gosh, there's so many things we could talk about, but yeah, those are probably at the top of the list just for maybe some quick relief. Yeah.
So posture, breathing, chewing, you know.
Yeah.
Very, very
I
well.
also wanted to add one other one. This is kind of popular among professionals, but they'll have like a salad for lunch, right? Because they think that's the quick, easy thing to get. And it's quote unquote healthy. Well, for somebody who has impaired digestion for whatever reason, whether it's SIBO or not, that raw food is really hard to digest. So I might recommend switching out some of those raw things like raw salads, raw vegetables, for something that's a little more well cooked, like roots and squashes and good proteins. That may be easier on your digestive system as well.
With some room temperature water.
Yeah, I mean, you can have it a little chilled, but not this crazy amount of ice and the amount of water. I always suggest drinking the majority of your liquids between meals because you get more of a cleansing effect than, you know, kind of flooding out your stomach acid while you're eating. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Does that make sense? Yeah.
Totally. And I was going to ask, like, so someone's listening to you and they say, okay, how does it work when they want to work with you? Is this something you filled online? Do you have a consultation? How does it, can you break that down?
Yeah. So there's a couple of ways you can get in contact with me. Obviously, my website is sort of the hub. That's where you'll find information about me, and I have free resources on there for you as well. Speaking of the mindful eating guide, there's also a quiz on there. Are you just kind of curious at this point? Take the quiz. Do I have SIBO? Or I know I have SIBO, but now what do I do next? There's things that you can use on there. But the best way to kind of contact me is to either book a VIP day if you know you're ready. So it's like a 1-day intensive where we're just going to dive in, go through all your lab work and do the thing and come up with a personalized strategy on the spot. Or set up a strategy call. So it's just a 20-30 minute call with me. Let's talk about what's going on and how I think I can help you. And then we'll decide, you know, if we're a good match or not. But those are the best ways.
And do you work with people globally or just domestically?
I do. Over the years, I have had international clients from all over the world. Recently, I'm kind of Still trying to work out my schedule. It's really hard to meet people in different time zones sometimes, and respecting my own healing journey of like trying to keep a regular schedule. So depending on where they're at, and if I can get them in my schedule, I'll try my best. Yeah.
And what's the website for people listening? I'll put it in the show notes, of course.
Yeah, so it's www.thesibocoach.com.
Perfect. Okay, that's easy to remember. That's a good domain to have.
Yeah.
Going forward. And this is great. I appreciate your time, because SIBO, we're hearing a little bit permeating into the news and the health and biohacking space, but to have it broken down like that was very informative for me and for people listening, of course. The SIBOcoach.com. Thank you again for your time today, Jen.
Yes, my absolute pleasure.